and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a podcast where we read about some Dungeons and Dragons and discuss how we might include it in our role-playing campaigns. Hello? Yes, it's morning. Hi, my name... Again, behind the scenes
Have you written that down? I'm watching you, and you're looking down as if the opening passage is the most important thing we say on this podcast.
Yes, absolutely.
People love the free-flowing Fiona. They love the wit and the,
But so I had that first line is at the top of every single one of my notes, and then I have nothing. If anything, I should put in big letters, improvise, and I forget every single time. Yeah. Because obviously I have to go, and with me as always, it's my co-host Ryan, and then I turn to you to fill in the awkward silence. So,
hi Fiona, insert humour here. How are you doing today?
Banter. Yeah, I'm doing really well.
Good. I'm doing fine as well. It is really funny because we've done enough of these now that you form a sort of autopilot. There's at no point have either of us ever sat down and gone, right, here's the script for the start, but you can't help but get into a bit of a pattern with it. So you find yourself opening it in the same way over and over and over and over and over. And I've realized I just don't have a pattern. So you do so well. Like I seem to have just randomly started just babbling at the beginning of mine.
But you do it so well. So I falter after the first sentence and you just carry on and eventually we get there. And I think that's better.
Is it? If you were driving and you were like, right, I need to get from point A to B, but Ryan's taken us to C, D, and E before he gets there. And we're all travel sick and we've run out of petrol.
Ryan, of course I wouldn't let you drive. Don't be silly.
That's true. That's fair. That's very fair.
Ryan, what are we doing today? What is our topic of choice?
Just like my speeches, sometimes getting from point A to point B can be a confusing and difficult process, especially if you find yourself, I don't know, with a limb hacked off, or maybe with your head dismembered. These things get very confusing, and for us mortal, pathetic, terrible humans, it can tend to be the end of the road. It is a bit of a problem with DMs, generally speaking. If the party comes and chops the head off a creature that you want them to fight, generally speaking, that's encounter over, especially if they have like a Vorpal sword or something. I call the Vorpal sword, by the way, the DM's bane. That thing ruin your campaign with one natural 20, and suddenly all of the potions of giant, fantastic, magical escape that you've given them to really put that storyline together just don't work, because it's just absolutely horrible. So let's say you want to put something into a campaign that the players can't dismember in one go.
Sounds good.
Something big and scary and full of limbs and definitely isn't someone you know. It is a troll. Trolls are the classic... they span beyond D&D. They go to fairy tales world over of these things that live under bridges and are big and scary, and most importantly, eat children, and normally the things that happen with trolls. D&D's kind of probably stepped away from that a little bit and have given that one to the Oni, who is a terrifying creature itself. I know, if you want to go trolls on steroids, Onis are just, they even come with a rhyme in the book, and if anything comes with a rhyme, that's a difficult thing to deal with. But that's Onis and that's not trolls. I'm getting sidetracked again. Trolls are in D&D these horribly chaotic, evil, mercenary, just plain hungry, nasty pieces of work that will kill, maim, and eat everything they can, serve under pretty much everyone that wants to pay for them, but will kind of do their own thing. And most importantly, they regenerate, which is the defining point of trolls world over. Now, we had trolls in D&D 5th edition from day one. They came in the monster manual and there was a whole one page on them, which I thought was really sad because they're only challenge rating 5, which is beautifully terrifying if you throw them against low-level players, which I would always advise you do. You give them a bit of a scare. They always love it when, oh, yes, my awesome character, I throw the dart at the troll and it does 4 damage. And then I bonus action, it does another 4 damage. And you're like, yay, wonderful. And now it regenerates. And I was like, what?
Oh, no.
Exactly. But they didn't get that itch. It describes them as serving giants. And when anything serves giants, you're like, okay, well, you need to be able to stand up to a giant. And a challenge rating 5 troll, this thing with 20 constitution, which is a huge amount of constitution, only has 84 hit points. I mean, terrible. So we were very happy because Mordenkainen, his Tome of Foes came along with 3 whole more pages of trolls, which if you're looking for more trolls, having triple the troll, oh, that's wonderful.
Triple the
So we've
troll,
got
triple the fun, yeah.
a triple troll.
That's our motto, yeah.
Exactly. The troll was cut in half and it grew back into one more troll, and then that happened again and again and again. So we've now got lots of different options for trolls, and more importantly, we have options for really nasty trolls. So we're going to have a bit of a troll day. We're going to go through them and talk about them and have a think about how you should put them into your campaigns, because you like to throw things into your campaigns that characters can't kill.
So it's so bizarre because now you've got your camera on, all I can see is your happy face as you're telling me all these horrible things.
For the audience, just imagine Ryan Reynolds smiling. That's the impression you need to get to. Yeah. And definitely not like a younger Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, trolls, interesting one. Like you said, they're just always around, and again that figment of sort of fairy tales and like this idea of an unending or uncontrollable hunger. I just imagine like Spirited Away, where people are just eating and eating and eating, and they just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's just quite horrific that it's never satisfied. And what I also liked in the Monster Manual, talked about them being very difficult to control because they can do as they please, even when working with more powerful creatures. So like you said, you'd think if they're working with like giants or ogres or ettins or any of these sort of creatures, the power dynamics between them must be like something to consider, I guess, because obviously if you like, okay, now we've brought a troll, you know, the thing is like there's a troll in the dungeon. There needs to be a reason why they're being used, and they're not stupid per se. Like they may be low-witted, but they're still like, you know, a fearsome thing that you can't necessarily outwit. So excited.
Like a dumb mercenary. It's that really difficult and interesting subcategory of evil villain that is somebody that could be paid and is paid via bribes, threats, or other treasure that it deems to be worthy. But again, intelligence 7, wisdom 9. This thing, it's not, as you say, it functions. I've seen players with much worse stats than that have perfectly good campaigns. Hey, no, your player, don't believe anything that she says on this. I haven't never seen a character sheet she's produced with less than like 12 as a stat. So
no, I have. I use standard array when I all the time, and you go, no, we like to roll, and I'm like, all right, oh wow, look. I've gone over. Whoops.
Well, look, my weighted dice have done it again. That's amazing. But it's one of those things where they are definitely malleable and manipulatable, which is a word. Definitely. If you come across one, you are just as likely to be able to bribe it into not attacking you, because it does have a bit of intelligence. If you were to so choose, chances are you'll probably just want to kill it because, you know, players like to have a good scrap. But there we go.
Why don't we just dive straight in? What kind of trolls are we looking at here today?
So, as I say, page 291 in the Monster Manual has the standard basic troll, which gives you all the stats that you need to throw one into your party. The things you need to kind of take away from trolls generally is that they are large giants. So they count as giants. They do not count as humanoids or monstrosities. So when players are using spells, remember that if it's got, 4 limbs and stands upright, doesn't necessarily mean it's a humanoid. So things like Charm Person, nope, that's not going to work for you. I've seen that one done a few times, and it's worth bearing that one in mind. They are not that perceptive, but they do have advantage on perception checks that rely on smell. So make sure your players have bathed recently. They will find you. Actually, no, even bathing would be a bad idea, because the lavender on your breath, why would you be drinking bathwater? That's horrifying.
That is horrifying. But also, I guess trolls eat anything. So they're like, oh, yes, lavender flavored humanoids.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll sleep better.
They have a multi-attack, which is good. Generally speaking, all the trolls we're going to talk about have a multi-attack based on whatever limbs they have at their disposal, which is a worrying sentence that will make much more sense as we go through it. So basic one has a multi-attack that it can attack with its bite and its 2 claws. So again, it's quite simple. It's got a nice standard to hit. Whenever a creature has multiple attacks, and they have different to hits, because some are dex and some are strength and other bits. As a DM, you just roll your eyes and go, oh, here we go. I'm going to have to check it every time. But a nice +7, that's good. If your party's wandering around with 13 to 16 AC, that's good. You're going to hit them more often than not. So that's okay. Some nice, decent damage and a regeneration, which is the defining point of trolls generally. 10 hit points at the start of its turn back, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that is less than a minute for this troll with 84 hit points. Is it? No, just over a minute. Maths, morning. It's a minute and a half for a troll to go from basically 1 hit point to full hit points if you leave it out of combat. So if it runs away and you're like, oh, we've beaten it back, within, as you say, like a very small space of time, 15 rounds or so, it will be back on full health, full pissed. So be careful about that. It regenerates every turn unless it takes acid or fire damage. Again, the type of troll is a little bit interesting when you determine how that works. But the general idea is that acid and fire can stem and cauterize the wounds of the troll, basically stopping it from regenerating.
Regeneration is an interesting trait anyway, not only just on trolls, because I always get the last bit wrong. So it says like the creature or the troll only dies if it's hit by attack that deals 10 or more fire or acid dice whilst the troll is at 0 hit points. So does that mean, and this is me being stupid, that it's at 0 hit points, it can still regenerate if it's not been hit by stuff? So like it could be down.
Absolutely.
But then
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what tends to happen, and I've seen this done a few times, and I think this is how I would do it as well, is you would, and this only tends to work once before your players cotton onto it, but you have a fight, the character standing over it with the sword is brandished and described the epic death as it kills the troll and it's slain dead on the floor. And you're like, right, well, what are you all doing? And then they're like, oh, yes. Well, they start talking to each other. And you're just like, just by the way, what are you doing? Like, oh, yeah. So at the start of its next round, you guys have all just stood there doing nothing but talking. It now has 10 hit points. It stands up and attacks you again. And suddenly, that's the way you do it. So specifically, even if you chop this thing's head off, or you do so much damage to it that it is... there's the rule of having massive damage in D&D where you take it beyond negative max health. So it's got 84 health. So somehow you took it beyond negative 84 in one hit. It would still come back. You can only kill this thing if it doesn't regenerate. So specifically, you have to kill it to 0 and also inflict fire or acid damage on it. A really interesting thing if your party don't have access to those two elements.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I assume majority of parties would have access to fire in some aspects because they will obviously like have oil flasks and be able to like torch and stuff. But even if you didn't, acid, very rarely do, because obviously we've talked about this before where we're like poison and acid damage, it's like you get to a point where like, well, we don't need it anymore because we're either resistant to it or everything we fight is resistant to it. So I just felt that was really interesting because I thought, how often do you have a flask of acid on you? Very rarely. So yeah, interesting.
It helps to be that person in the party that does collect the alchemical fires and the vials of acid and bits like that, because these are the sort of things where you're thinking, oh, well, I've got this jar that's 100 gold and it does 2d4 damage. Yay. I might as well have just sneezed on somebody at my level and it probably would have done more damage. But it does help. It really adds up. And most importantly, radiant damage doesn't have the same effect. So those cheeky paladins can't smite these things into oblivion. It's all the better for that.
We have our classic troll, the troll under the bridge, the troll in the forest. What other types of trolls could we have then?
So the idea behind trolls is that if you deal damage to them, they regrow. Specifically, if you chop a limb off, it doesn't really feel pain in the same way. Trolls are quite unbothered by wounds, pain, and attacks generally because they know, say their arm was chopped off, they could simply take the arm and reattach it to their flimsy stump and it would just regrow, effectively, reattach itself. Even still, the limb will regrow after about an hour, just from nothing. Trolls can absolutely bring them back. But that regeneration, that incredibly fast metabolism and regenerative structure to the body causes them to be highly unstable. Unstable is the DM's favorite word because as soon as unstable comes in, you're like, well, what sort of unstable? And this is where Mordenkainen comes in. So we're looking at pages 243 to 245, which gives some descriptions of trolls that have had their forms totally changed or altered somehow because of the fact that either that regenerative ability was changed or made extreme in some way, or something happened to their cause of death that has changed the way they regenerated permanently. Generally speaking, if something happens to a troll that effectively influences the way it comes back, it's not good for you because they get tougher. And the first description of that, which is the beautiful picture that you are like greeted with as soon as you come into this section is a dire troll. So, I mean, what do you think of that picture? It's just, how would you describe it?
How would I describe it? It's well, a nightmare, obviously. I'm sure I've had meetings with this person. Essentially, just to describe it, it is a sort of a green, fleshy, sort of really tall humanoid with many heads, several limbs, like arms coming out of limbs. I think on the right, the furthest left arm, there's like fingers coming out of like the forearm, which makes me feel really sick because like, what is the point of those? And then obviously faces like in the stomach and the torso area. Yeah, it doesn't look happy. I've got to be honest. It looks like it's not had its morning coffee. So.
No, it looks pretty pissed off with life, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea about these sort of trolls is that once the damage to a troll becomes so extreme and they have to regenerate themselves back from a sort of crazy level, they come back in sort of warped and weird ways. So a dire troll is a troll that has had huge damage to it, and it is embraced cannibalism to some extreme, either because it has been killing other trolls and eating them, or more generally speaking, because it's decided to take amateur surgery just up as a hobby.
Yeah.
And those open wounds on its body caused by either fighting or getting into scraps or, you know, or even more worrying, self-inflicted wounds, it has decided to start surgically attaching other things to its body, specifically the limbs, heads, or organs. I love the word of organ there, of other trolls. So once this troll starts to go, right, okay, I've got this huge wound on my shoulder and my fellow troll has died, I'm just going to take its head and stick it on my shoulder. Suddenly, hey presto, you have a troll with two heads. Say a limb was chopped off, the arm came off at the joint, and they're like, well, I'm going to stick mine on, but actually, why don't I just stick on another troll's arm at the same time? Hey presto, now I have two arms coming out at the side of this. And that embracing of that cannibalistic, just troll-fueled regeneration, it begins to get chaotic and wild. And soon you find that the wounds inflicted on the torso and on the legs start growing teeth and have faces and extra muscles and extra, musculage and just general sinew begins to grow in places. And before you know it, it's a lot bigger. I mean, these things are huge rather than large, which means they're, pushing up 20 feet now. And they get hilariously strong.
Yeah, +6, isn't it, on the strength score? The line that got me in this was like, obviously that you said organs. And it's like multiple eyes, arms, claws, etc. And now you've just said teeth. I can't remember what the name of it was, but when people have excess calcium, like growing places around their skin, so they just get teeth on their knuckles and eyes. That's what I'm imagining. So I guess for me, like one thing is like, oh yeah, it's got lots of heads and stuff, but the idea of like squishing on extra eyes just randomly, almost like tattoos, or extra pointless like mouths that don't go anywhere, that's horrifying. Yeah. So I definitely be using that a lot more than possibly an extra head or two, because I guess that's the more traditional way of thinking about it. But yeah, it's horrific just thinking about it there.
It really is. It really is horrifying. And to put it in perspective, a dire troll mechanically is very similar to a regular troll. The difference is now it's challenge rating 13, and it comes at you with a lot more limbs. Yeah. It really does shake them around a bit, like it was on the dance floor in the 70s. It is absolutely hell for leather with these things. It's got 172 hit points, keen senses, regeneration as well. Interestingly, regeneration is 10 points still, which is, it doesn't get any better. I've seen creatures in this book, especially vampires, for instance, that have 20 regeneration as opposed to 10. So it doesn't get any stronger. But the thing is that it's almost got like, that sort of effect where you can do half of it on a failed save or like a pass save or something. Now it regenerates 5 hit points still if it takes acid and fire damage, and you can only kill it if you bring it to 0 hit points and also do 10 or more fire and acid damage. So even, putting your flaming torch to the wounds is not enough to keep this thing down. You need to really incinerate it or really burn it. Its attacks are stronger. Now it's +11 to hit, and it's got 5 attacks because it's got 1 bite, I know, and 4 claws. And to put that in perspective, those 5 attacks do, on average, 10 and then 16 damage 4 times on average when they hit. So that's about 70 damage per round. So this thing can get a bit nuts. Plus, it has a recharge ability, my favorite as a DM, because you can put the fear of God into a party at the beginning of the fight and then watch as it never recharges ever again.
Yeah.
Each creature within 10 feet of the troll must make a Dex 19 saving throw. 19's bloody hard. If you don't have proficiency in that, you're failing that throw. Taking 44 slashing damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. It's pretty nonsense. It's very fun. It does a lot of damage, but they're not maneuverable really. They've got 40 feet, but they can't fly. They can't really, they don't have ranged attacks. You know, intelligence 9, these things are not clever particularly. So with a bit of intuitive and a bit of intelligence, the party should be able to deal with them, but still scary.
I'm good because I'm being very silly about this. So obviously, ideally, you'd use the multi-attack all the time because that gives you the most damage in the turn if you were playing this. But the Whirlwind of Claws, is that like, could you do both of those, a multi-attack and a Whirlwind of Claws, or could you only do one or the other if you recharge it?
Yeah, interestingly, this is any stat block in the monster manual. It can get confusing, especially with spellcasters, but where it says actions, anything below that point, each one of those technically is its own separate action. Right. So I could, in theory, use an action to use bite as a troll, and that's all that it does that turn. It doesn't do anything else. I could do claws and it makes one claw attack. It's just that multi-attack is a thing in the monster manual for DMs to use that effectively upscales creatures to give them the equivalent of like a multi-attack or like a sort of extra attack that players have. So if it's got multi-attack, you use that instead of the bite or the claw action. Right. And then it basically is like, now you can do 5 things instead of 1. But the multi-attack is its own separate action, just like the claws is its own separate action as well. So if you use the Whirlwind of Claws, you can't then multi-attack on top of that. In the same way that if you had a dragon, for instance, with a breath weapon or the ability to cast a spell or the ability to make a melee attack, multi-attack or whatever it is, you can do one of those things. The only time that rule is broken is if you've got legendary actions, which you can add in. By the way, if you ever want to add legendary actions into a creature, it's fairly easy to do. Just give it 3 extra one-off attacks per turn and increase the challenge rating by 2. Generally speaking, it's a pretty good rule.
I guess for me, because I rarely, soon will be using creatures that do have these things. And again, we talked about this before. It's like, if you're doing like an ideal like opening round, which one would you do first? And I guess you would use Whirlwind of Claws first because it has that very high dexterity saving throw where, it's an all-out thing. And then people, I guess, go in close to try and attack it. And then you use the multi-attack. But again, I don't know. I feel like, again, because I guess it's a one-off. And it doesn't do as much damage as multi-attack. Why would you not just use multi-attack all the time?
Yeah, it depends on, I think as a DM, you've got to look at it from what's around the creature at that time. If you've got a party that have a bunch of melee people, so there's a paladin, a rogue, and a fighter all surrounding the troll, all doing melee damage, suddenly the Whirlwind of Claws, that's not 44 damage, that's 44 times by 3, because it will hit each one of them. That's true. So it will be a better option for you. But you're right, if you're fighting a barbarian, for instance, in one-on-one combat, the Whirlwind of Claws may not be the best thing. It also depends on how the creatures are. If somebody's playing a really, really undexterous plate-armored person with 22 AC, for instance, say they were a half-elf paladin with like an hour +2 shield and +1 plate armor, and you're like, why did I give them that much AC? That's horrifying. And these +11 attacks can't hit because then they use shield on you and suddenly their AC is 28 and it's just impossible to that's nonsense. A DC 19 dex save may be a better way to get around that because it's just they don't have as high a dex save. So as a DM, you can use a little bit of intelligence if you want, but it's kind of your choice.
It's good to know because again, I wasn't really sure because I've never really come across that before. Obviously, like you said, it makes sense with like creatures when it's an actual breath weapon. But I guess for me, thinking of like Whirlwind of Claws, it's like it's still to me it's the same action as like fighting with claws. So good to know.
Different mechanics though. The one to keep an eye out for spellcasters. Say you had an evil supervillain, the vampire, that could cast spells and they appear at random points in a campaign. Casting spells, for instance, is an action. So that is something that would take away, say, a bite or a claw attack or a multi-attack. So you can't use one and the other in the same turn. So that's when you would rely on legendary actions, for instance, to get around that.
Cool, good to know. All right, dire trolls, terrifying. What next?
So they're actually the most difficult of assortments. They're quite simple because they're just straight up in your face, scratchy. But the other trolls are just as fun. The rot troll is one of the most horrifying pictures that I've ever seen, because in the same way that some people find extra limbs and Cthulhu-esque like drawing terrifying, and other people hate, again, we've spoken about this, that natural condition where you hate like holes and things, the natural assortment of like, wasps' nests and that sort of hive network.
The honeycomb,
Yeah, I forget what that's called, but my wife has
let's
it.
not say it so people don't look it up.
Yeah, it's really, really horrible. But one of mine is exposed muscle. Like I find that really horrifyingly, just either I would rather see a skeleton or I'd rather see skin. I don't want to go that middle.
Interesting,
Blah. Oh, have you seen The Mummy, where he's like half regenerated and like all his limbs and sinew is all out? And
well, both my parents were doctors, so we'd always have medical drawings around the house of here is a human head, here are all the muscles, it's all drawn. You're like, this is not natural to be around, like as a teenager growing up. I was like, this is disgusting. But yes, I completely agree. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a rot troll is effectively a troll that has embraced that necrosis, that breaking down of its own regeneration. Specifically, if it was killed or infused with waves of necrotic energy at the point where it was regenerating. So as it basically the body withers away and it was trying to regrow, all that it got was necrotic energy. It's the one troll that doesn't really regenerate at all. If anything, it's gone the other way. Now it is actively breaking down. And rot trolls add a little bit of a twist to the general, jump in and kill the rot troll. It's got a lot of health. It's got 138. It's got 3 attacks. It's got its bite and its multi-attack with the 2 claws on top of that. Nice +8 to hit. So generally speaking, it's like a troll, but its challenge rating is 9 because it has rancid degeneration. Degeneration.
Degeneration. You got it. Second time.
Rancid degeneration. Oh, dear. At the start of each of the troll's turns, each creature within 5 feet of it takes 11 necrotic damage, unless the troll has taken acid or fire damage since the start of last turn. That's your favorite. Oh, you've got a melee person in right next to you. Oh, well, it's constantly taking necrotic damage now because the thing is rotting away, and like bits of skin and muscle keep falling on the person and, burning them, and fun.
Yeah, it talks about, like, again, the little paragraph of description, like as the troll's body withers, its flesh falls away as quickly as it forms. Again, that image in your head, terrifying. And the idea of like an aura or something just next to it. So like, you need to get close to it, otherwise, to hit it. Oh yeah, horrible creature. But easy enough, again, like you're saying, like with the multi-attack, it's just 3 attacks to remember and stuff. So it's, I think compared to like the dire troll, a little bit easy to go, but even a little bit more disgusting.
Absolutely. Well, with anything like all the trolls have a start of turn ability, even its regeneration or some sort of, as I say, degeneration that's going on. So when you're tracking initiative, I would advise you just by whatever the troll is on your initiative tracker, just write start of turn activity or whatever it may be in big letters so you can't miss it. Even put that on the line above where the troll is a really good way of doing it as well. So you're like, okay, right, I've gone from party member 1, party member 2, regeneration, and then what's that mean? Oh, right, yeah, there it is. Wonderful. So there's nothing that you need to forget. It's also good at end of turn abilities as well. Just put them as a separate thing in the tracker just below. Yeah, exactly. Works really well there.
All right, fairly straightforward. We've had the dire troll, we've had the rot troll. Where else can we go with trolls?
Well, let's take the body away entirely, and we're going to go to spirit trolls. Now, the idea behind a spirit troll is that they have been blasted with psychic energy at the point where this thing starts to regenerate. It basically means that the mind will survive, but the body is blown away. And as it regenerates, even without the troll noticing, it becomes incorporeal, it becomes ghostly, and effectively becomes as insubstantial as shadow. Basically, you've got a ghost troll.
Yes.
It's effectively what a spirit troll is.
Yeah, I don't like these. I think I was okay with dire trolls with like extra limbs, fine. Rot trolls, I get it. I feel these are really silly. I think you got to that point where you're like, okay, what's the worst thing we can imagine? I know, ghost trolls. It's like, if you've ever watched like a Doctor Who, it's like Russell T Davies, where you've run out of ideas and go, I know, a reality bomb. And you're like, oh, for God's sake. Like it's just elevated it and heightened it to the point where it's like, when is this ever going to be relevant? A ghost troll, when is that ever going to be relevant? That's in my head is what it is.
Well, let me tell you, anything that deals psychic energy tends to be stuff that comes from the Underdark, because that tends to be the sort of thing. So if you're running a campaign with Illithids, Mind Flayers, this could be exactly the sort of thing that they have captured and they have been subjugating to their Mind Flayer-esque horrifying. Maybe the thing's brain has been eaten repeatedly because it keeps regenerating for food. And it's been dealt psychic damage. Maybe the Durgar have got to it. Maybe even the Gith have got to it, and they're the ones that killed it because the troll took some artifact that the Gith then decided to steal for their own devices. All of these things that I think it is pretty much all have been your topics, Fee. So, this is your perfect person.
I think I draw the line at ghost trolls, I guess that's my thing. But you're completely right. All these things are valid. I guess the line that gets me is that the troll might be unaware of its transition. It still moves and attacks with teeth and claws, but it now strikes at the victim's mind. Like, I was like, quite a powerful sentence, I guess, but for me, it's just like one step too far. But you're right.
It's a very silly sentence.
I
agree with you there. Yeah. Anything that strikes at a victim's mind is just going to be trouble. But they actually mechanically work very much like regular trolls. They don't have a fly speed. They simply move around, challenge rating 11. The differences come with the fact that they now deal psychic damage as opposed to bludgeoning or slashing damage. So that is something that might get around parties' defenses, such as if they're raging as a barbarian, for instance. Psychic damage tends to be the one that always gets through. And the bite attack now has a DC 15 wisdom save or stunned for 1 minute. Now that is incredibly effective because stunning. Effective. Oh yes, stunning is instant crit. So that's pretty good. Is that instant? No, is it? It's pretty. It at least takes actions away. Like, it's a really effective thing.
It's a bad thing for your players, but a good thing for you as a DM.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty good. They do get to save out of it at the end of each of their turns. But even if you take a turn away from a party member, that's pretty effective. It helps the spirit troll stay on terms. It can move through things. Incorporeal movement is a DM's best friend because that is really, really fun. You're having a fight, it can't win. It just walks through the door. It maybe climbs through the ceiling and disappears. Whatever these things, it can escape. Or it can move through party members. It can, avoid traps. This thing can be really, really, really intriguing. It also regenerates, which is always good. 10 points at the beginning of every turn, unless it takes psychic or force damage. Exactly. Harder to do than you think, but there are some easy ones there, like Magic Missile or Eldritch Blast tend to be some pretty good ones for force damage. Finally, the resistances and immunities on this thing, just like any good ghost, are hilarious. It has resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, and thunder damage, which is most element types, and includes acid and fire, which are your two traditional troll killers. So if you were planning on having a bit of fun with it, with acid and fire, this thing resists them. Specifically as well, it is immune to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. So basically any NPC your party brought with you tend to be useless. Condition immunities as well. It can't be exhausted, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, pruned, restrained, or unconscious. It can, however, be charmed. So that I always find as it's technically this is not an undead. It is a giant still. So it is still charmable, which I find hilarious. So yeah, there you go. There is a spirit troll.
And just because I quickly looked it up, a stunned creature is incapacitated, and it says, see the condition. But I was like, no, I'm not looking at that. Can't move and can only speak falteringly. Creature automatically fails strength and dexterity saving throws, and attack rolls against creature have advantage. So not crits.
Wonderful. I think incapacitated as well means that the player loses concentration on spells immediately, because we have that one come up again.
Can't take actions or reactions.
There you go. So, I mean, it's pretty fundamentally nasty. You're not going to get out of that one very easily.
No, not at all. All right. You've convinced me. Maybe there is a place in my world for spirit trolls, but maybe we'll table that one for now. What is our final sort of troll that we're looking at today?
Well, we've saved the best to last because this one is that chubby, ugly, fat relative that always creeps around the edges of the funerals. You're like, I've never seen this person before.
The Aunt Marge, yeah.
Yes. They're greasy, they're bulbous, they have 7 chins, and they seem to be scoffing down all the cakes and judging you. And whenever they come to you, they're the ones that desire 3 kisses on the lips. And you're like, ugh.
Ugh.
Horrifying. This is the Venom Troll. Now, Venom Trolls are trolls that have been ravaged by massive doses of poison. And the poison has sort of effectively been incorporated into the regenerative ability of the troll. Maybe it's replaced their blood. Maybe it's now covered in horrifying boils full of thick regenerating poison. Whatever it is, the thing has combined its love of being hurt with its love of being poisonous. And now it is a venomous, horrifying sack of fun is the best way. It's got huge gout-like limbs, an entirely full belly. The thing looks really fat. It's one of the most fun things to throw at a party because used well, this thing is an utter nightmare to fight.
Poison leaks from its pores to coat its fangs and claws. And yeah, just looking at it, it looks like it will burst at any moment, this image. And the fact that you can actually see it actually leaking this liquid again. So describing that in a combat probably will indicate to your players that this is not going to go well for you if you stay any closer. So.
No, exactly. So differences between this and a regular troll. This is only challenge rating 7, and mechanically, up to a point, it's very similar. It's got a bite and 2 claws. It's got a little bit of poison damage on every hit. So, for instance, a claw attack, which is still a +7, so no different to a regular troll. It's got 2d6 plus 4 slashing damage, and then an extra d8 of poison damage. Again, the DM's favorite thing when a creature uses 2 different damage die on a single attack. It is a nightmare because remembering how many of each dice you've got. Also, any dice app you've got tends not to work when you've got 2 different dice to roll at the same time. So can't even use that. It's just a nightmare. But a little bit of poison damage when it hits, that's fine. Nothing too bad at the moment. It has a venom spray recharge ability where it slices itself with a claw, releasing a spray of poison in a 15-foot cube. A cube is a cube that spans from the front of it centered on itself. So one of the faces of the cube is kind of like by your belly, effectively, and it spans out. Imagine if a Teletubby could blast people with its TV screen. That's exactly what we're dealing with here. This is that sort of...
Not Poe. Oh, no.
I'm thinking exactly Poe. Poe is the one. Poe's not to be trusted. Everyone takes DC 16 con save or takes 18 or 48 poison damage and is poisoned for 1 minute. Now, damage is great. Damage is fine. Damage is how you're going to bring players down or at least give them the excitement of having a combat that's going badly for them. Poison is how you make them regret ever playing your game in the first place because poison gives them disadvantage on pretty much anything that matters to them, including attack rolls and saving throws and I think ability checks as well.
Yeah, disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. So
not saving throws. There you go.
Apparently not. But again, all the important things in battle.
So hitting this thing becomes a lot more difficult when you are attacking with disadvantage every time. It is absolutely horrifyingly annoying as a player. So that's good fun. They get to save out of it every turn. But that's fine. That's not even the best bit. We're not even excited about the fact that this thing is immune to being poisoned and poison damage, which is exciting. The regeneration, again, acid or fire damage stops it, and it is 10 hit points at the beginning of every turn. That's not even the most exciting thing. No. Poison splash. It is the ability that defines a Venom Troll and makes it super fun. When the troll takes damage of any type, not even melee damage, any type except psychic. I will guarantee your players will not be doing psychic damage because psychic damage spells tend to be a bit rubbish. Each creature within 5 feet of the troll takes 9 poison damage or 2d8. So let's imagine that we've started the combat and your 2 melee characters, your paladin and your barbarian, have run over to this troll and they're beginning to fight it. They're having a bit of a scrap and suddenly the ranged NPCs come in and go, we'll help, and start bombarding it with longbow arrows from a distance. Every time this thing gets hit, poison sprays from this thing doing 2d8 damage, 2d8 damage, 2d8 damage every single time. And suddenly before you know it, those melee characters are like, no.
Stop it.
Stop. We're going to run away now and you know, the thing's regenerating still. So yeah, it's absolutely disgustingly nasty. It can do a huge amount of damage, and actually, especially if, because it's one thing to remember as well, as a DM, you don't necessarily always have to take the actions in the monster manual. Normally, as long as the creature can actually do these things, any of the actions identified in the player's handbook can also be taken: the dash, the dodge, the disengage action, all of those things, including grapple attacks as well. So say you wanted to use a claw attack to make a grapple check instead, that's totally fine. In fact, actually this thing can do 2 of them because it's got 2 claw attacks. So you could try and grapple a player with an attack of opportunity attack as the troll goes, no,
where are you going?
Here with me now, exactly. And then you realize this thing has 18 strength and is not going to let you go easily. It can be hilarious.
It's a very fascinating one to look at. Like you said, like the poison splash, the venom spray. Again, that idea of the troll slicing itself down its torso and just exploding this cube is a horrific sight. So everything about it. I actually prefer this one over all of them. And I was just looking at like the AC of them. They're not necessarily that hard to hit. You know, they have tough skin, maybe natural skin. The lowest is, both the venom and the dire troll are 15 AC. And then beyond that is you got 16 with the rot troll, and then spirit troll, which makes sense because there's no bodies, is 17. So it's not necessarily, I guess because obviously they're all slightly higher challenge ratings as well by the Venom Troll. You're gonna have, your characters are gonna hit them, but that just means the damage that is sort of ensued as a result from hitting them, certainly with the Venom Troll, you're just gonna have more and more damage, and so they have to be a bit more careful when playing it. So
yeah, exactly. As I say, Venom Troll's not actually that much harder, but I think it's harder than a rot troll, to be honest. I think the 2 of them probably should have been mixed together or swapped together, with the Venom Troll having the rot troll stats and having it the other way around, because the rot troll challenge rating 9, I mean, that necrotic shroud is good, but every time you get hit, poison splash is even more fun. So I think that's probably something they could have swapped, but these things are fun.
These things are fun. So out of all of these, Ryan, again, you kind of sort of said it there, which one would you say is your favourite that you would unleash in your campaigns more if you had the chance to?
I think I quite enjoy the Venom Troll. I really do enjoy that one. But if I was having to play another one, just the simplicity of the Dire Troll, I think, is quite terrifying. Having that real melee bruiser that can force people into a DC 19 dex save, that's good fun. So I think it can do enough damage to be horrifying. It's got regeneration. It's absolutely massive. So it's got big reach of 10 feet on all of its attacks. Yeah, you can have a lot of fun with that.
Everything else is just large, isn't it? Let me just check. Yeah, yes. All the rest of large. This is huge Dire Troll, like you said. Oh, brilliant. Well, I feel more informed about those people that are stalking me on the internet. I just assume that they're all like this now. Yeah,
that's the problem with Trolls Online. They regenerate unless you throw fire at them. So just whenever you get one, just comment back with flames and they will go away. It's just how it works.
Just the emoji of flames, and hopefully they don't take that in the wrong way. Ryan, what are you up to? Is there anything you'd like to plug other than your phone? Because you've made that joke at least twice now on this podcast.
I would never. I would never do such a thing. That doesn't sound like my humor at all. Yeah, you can come and find me on the UrsaRyan Discord, or Turd, as everybody loves to call it. It is a brilliant place full of people that like to chat about primarily what I do in my sort of hobby time, which is play Civ 6. But we also have a lot of D&D chat and other chat about that sort of thing. So come and say hello. There's 500 people on it now, so you can come and discuss to your heart's content as to what you want about D&D. So yeah, come find me.
I will, and I will troll you with fire and flames.
You're allowed to. You're an admin. You're supposed to be helping.
I am helping by being silent.
Yeah.
My name is Fiona. I run the What Am I Rolling podcast. It is a twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast. As always, it is doing very, very well. It's always good to hear. One of the episodes, Artifact, that got released, is now featured on the actual game store for the game itself, because the game creator really enjoyed it and embedded it in their thing. So I was like, oh, that's very nice.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I was like, oh, great. So so that's been quite nice. Got things coming up, got various streams. Yeah, things are just ticking along quite nicely.
Scattered around the webverse, everywhere.
Everywhere, but always behind on my editing. So things are fine.
If anybody was ever ahead of editing, I'd be worried. That's not something you can do. It's a terrifying prospect, that.
Well, thank you so much for listening, and we will speak to you, we will talk to you in your ear holes next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.